So, good morning, you guys. I want to review AEW All In Texas, and I was actually down at the Texas Stadium. So, I do want to say that how I do this review is going to be a little different because when you see it live, there are people who can tell you all the moves and things that happen, and then there's people who, like me, who I don't really remember a lot of the matches, as far as what happened in them, but I'll do my best. But I'll just tell you overall, like what I think about the results and the things that have happened on the card, really. And I really would just say that overall, I would say that yes, this is their show of the year, the best show that they've had so far. And I would say Double or Nothing is the second best, and I would say that the third best would be Revolution. Dynasty, I would say, is the worst one, because nothing really stood out on that card. It was just like a holdover show. But yes, Moxley did lose the championship, and that was needed because it was not a good title reign. It was something where it's almost like if Hangman didn't walk out, that's like, who do you build, really? And I also like just the level of uncertainty that you had because you didn't know who was going to be involved and everything like that. Like, they did a really good job of making you kind of wonder what was going to happen during the night, really. And that's good because in professional wrestling, it's very predictable, but you have to subvert expectations, which means you think it's going to go one way and then goes another way, just like in a Quentin Tarantino film. So when I came in to the show, they had the Sons of Tech. They had like Shane Taylor Promotions versus the Sons of Texas. And I didn't really watch the match because I was actually trying to find my seat. But it's always great to see Dustin, there, and then also like the Von Erichs and Kevin Von Erich, because he's really old, so he's gonna, let's be honest, he's gonna die soon. So it's good that he's giving that like obviously in the state of Texas, the Von Erichs mean a lot. Yes, it makes sense to put them on the card. Yes, it makes sense for to give old people who don't have that much life left, just some like bask in that glory, So I appreciate that a lot, and I think that that's appropriate. But I also will say that JR was during the last two matches, and ultimately, like I said, like some people don't have that much time left, really. So it's good that they appreciate their veterans. Obviously, Shane Taylor Promotions is like the jobber of AEW, so obviously you know who wins this one. The next match was Big Boom AJ and the Conglomeration versus the Don Callis family. Hechicero, Lance Archer, Trent, and Rocky Romero. So there was a couple things I want to say about the match that obviously people really underestimate the Costco guys, because a lot of people will say, oh, they're stupid or they're quirky or they're not, what's the word, that they don't get over with the crowd. But it seems like the kids, like the Rizzler, and they get over very well with everybody and stuff like that. So you see one of them do a spear, you see like the Rizzler get some shine, really, and a lot of people are cheering for him. So it's almost like as I said, if they get a reaction out of people, if a lot of people are starting to cheer them and everybody's cheering, oh, we want the Rizzler and other things like that, then it shows that they need to continue working with them. Obviously these are the lower echelon, these are the lower people of the Don Callis family. Like Hechicero, Lance Archer, Trent, Rocky Romero never really win, so it's kind of predictable about who wins, and that's that, really. So and I don't mind it because obviously you want to like cheer the crowd up. So they were on like the they were on the what's the word, on the opening of the show. So the show opened with the Ops versus the Death Riders for the Trios Championship. Like I said, it was a very hard-hitting match, and there was a lot of like brawlers and brawling type of match, so everybody did their job, really. And I like the Ops, really. So I really hope they fight and they find new teams to challenge them. It can't just be them and the Death Riders. So could they defend the trio titles against the Hurt Syndicate? I think that would be that'd be a dream match. Like Lashley versus Samoa Joe, or Hobbs versus Lashley, or Hobbs versus Shelton Benjamin, or Hobbs versus MJF. I think that that's what they need to do. And then at the end of the match, they had a spot where the Ops ambush Samoa Joe, and he gets stretchered out, and I like that because obviously they're trying to like make you think about the main event. Like, is it going to be like, is it going to be like Avengers Endgame, or is it going to be like WrestleMania 40, where there's going to be a lot of interference? And when you have all these people taken out, really, then it's kind of almost like, you're a little like, oh well, is Hangman gonna be screwed over? Because now, like, the ops who hate the Death Riders, now they're getting screwed over. Now they're down one person, really. So I like that kind of like that type of, oh well, everything impacts the main event. Everybody makes you question the main event. So it's like a thriller, or a suspense thriller. Like, it's trying to like, it makes you care more about Hangman. It makes you doubt that he's going to win. It makes you feel uncertain. And then when he wins, that catharsis happens, really. So it definitely adds a thriller element to it. The next match on the card is the men's Casino Gauntlet match. With both Casino Gauntlet matches, I will say this, that they went on a very, very long time, so they have to be really careful with these matches, because sometimes it's like what I said, and I will say that this is a consistent complaint. Like, the shows are way too long. I believe this was like 6 hours or something like that. 5 or 6 hours, but I was starting to doze off during like Okada and Omega, really. So they have to be very, very careful. So you had a bunch of things happen in this one. You had MJF come out, and then you had Max Caster come out, and then Bandito came out in this. Mystico came out. Mark Briscoe came out. Brody King came out. There weren't any. There was Juice Robinson. He was a surprise, but I think a lot of people expected Darby Allin or other people to come out. So once again, I was kind of happy that you didn't know what was going to happen, really. It was predictable that MJF did win, but he was kind of like the right choice, really, because I've talked about this many times about Adam Page becoming champion, that he needs a heel faction to go against him, and the right heel faction is the Hurt Syndicate, because they are they know how to create heel heat, they know how to get over with the crowd, really, so they are the right people to potentially take the title off of Adam Page. And as I said, you can make Adam Page like a Ric Flair type, where you take titles off of him, then you put titles back. And then you can make MJF that type really as well, where they can feud over this. And then also, too, during the main event, I would say that it was interesting that MJF did not come out and cash in. Like, I understand that, there's a plot hole there because he takes advantage of opportunities, but I think that I'm happy he didn't cash in at the end of the night, really, because, this was a big moment for Hangman. This is like a WrestleMania feel-good moment. So if you do something like, take that away from the audience, it just could be a little too much, really, So I'm happy that they didn't do that. I forgot to mention there was FTR versus the Outrunners on the pre-show. So FTR wins, they cheat to win. I don't really care about this match that much. It was kind of predictable. The FTR usually cheats all the time, really. So, it is what it is. Adam Cole got injured, so they changed it to Adam Cole, Kyle Fletcher, Sammy, and Dustin Rhodes. And I was actually very surprised, and a lot of people were very surprised too, that Dustin Rhodes actually won. And I felt a little bothered by this, because I was like, Dustin has 2 titles in Ring of Honor, so now he's like Mercedes Monet. Like, he has 3 titles so far, and actually the trios title in Ring of Honor, they've not defended that title in about a year, really. So it's almost like when I think it was Eric Young and ODB were the Knockouts Women's Champion for over a year, and there's been when Dean Ambrose was in WWE, he held the United States title for a year, and not a lot of defenses, really. So I'm not really a fan of wrestlers, and I don't really have a lot of respect for wrestlers who just hold titles for a long time. They don't really defend it, really, because it's just it doesn't make you a better wrestler. It just kind of makes it look like they don't know how to book people. So I feel I just feel conflicted, and I know Dustin's real well backstage. He might have some backstage politics, but I felt it was more like a political move, really. But what I would also kind of say is I think that there's some positives in this. That obviously Dustin versus Kyle Fletcher would be a great match, and it would be a good veteran versus new blood type of match, really. So I do think that the positives outweigh the negatives, and Dustin can still go and he can have really great matches. So I think that if you want to put on a baby face for now, Dustin is the right person, and Dustin can speak well on the microphone. So obviously, I think that he and Fletcher should have a feud, but I do feel eventually the TNT title needs to go to Kyle Fletcher. I think that that's something that should happen within the next couple of months. Like, what I would do is, like, go from Dustin, go to Kyle Fletcher, and then go to Anthony Bowens. I think that's the best, series of people, really. But, like I said, I think that overall the positives outweigh the negatives for Dustin to hold that title. The next match on the card was Swerve and Osprey versus the Young Bucks. A lot of people were really uncertain about who was going to win, and at that point I was uncertain because I know like sometimes they can swerve people, but I kind of knew that Osprey and Swerve were going to win for a few reasons. That number one, they're former champions. Like Osprey's the IWGP champion. Swerve is a former AEW champion. So the problem is that if you have these guys lose to the Young Bucks, who are tag team partners, they've never been an AEW champion before, it just looks really bad and stupid. It's almost like if you have the Hardy Boys, Matt and Jeff Hardy, lose to like the Undertaker and Kane in the Attitude Era. The people will be like, how's that possible when these two people have held titles before? So you kind of just knew that it just didn't look, it wouldn't make sense really. And then the other thing too is that you would have to say to yourself, it would be really stupid because next month is Forbidden Door in London. So like Osprey versus Hangman is what's going to make the British crowd, the UK crowd happy really. So if the UK crowd kind of sees Osprey lose, it just doesn't have the same marketability really. I do think, and I also really think that, as I said, that, if you did something where Osprey and Swerve lose, and then Swerve gets mad and screws over Hangman, then you're just repeating, you may tell a different story and a different dynamic, but the problem is that it's just repetitive, really. It just becomes, you're spinning your wheels, really, because you're just saying, oh, well, it's just a continuation of the same story, really. It's like, I'm not sure how to say this. It's almost like in Naruto where, like Naruto and Sasuke keep fighting with each other, in Shippuden and in the Naruto, in the original Naruto series. Like eventually, like, if you keep doing back and forth with the same people in the same story and the same fights, it becomes repetitive. And so, like, I think they made the right decision with this. They made a decision that's also marketable because, you can do Swerve versus Hangman as well in the future. And then also too, like I was thinking for London, Hangman and Swerve and Osprey, should have a triple threat. And I think that in the future you can do Hangman versus Bryan Danielson, and then Hangman versus Darby and stuff like that. Really, eventually you want to get to Hangman versus MJF. That needs to happen. But yeah, but this was like the right choice. The match went a while, like obviously, there was a sequence of moves between them, like counterings and flips over each other, and like that was kind of the best sequence of the night. Like to me, the match of the night was the death match, but the second best match, the second most memorable match was Swerve and Osprey versus the Young Bucks. The next match on the card is the Hurt Syndicate, Patriarchy, and Jet Speed. So I had a bunch of feelings about this. That I felt that was a bad match. You didn't put the FTR in it because they've been beating the Outrunners, and it seems like like all the other teams kind of were doing a lot really to win matches or cause problems to the Hurt Syndicate. So I felt this should have been a fatal four-way. The Hurt Syndicate win. I think that was definitely the right choice. And then they turned Nick Wayne heel and Christian babyface because Adam Copeland comes out and saves him because I think what they want to do is Adam Copeland and Christian Cage as a tag team to go off into the sunset since they're not going to be since they're in their 50s, they're not going to be wrestling that much longer really. But it was kind of weird to see the FTR. It's going to be a weird dynamic to see FTR and Chris Sabian and then also Nick Wayne and all that. Like that's definitely going to be, that's going to be a really interesting group. I think that you could have had a lot more longevity in Nick Wayne and the Patriarchy. I think they kept them together. I also don't think that Nick Wayne and FTR are a great team because FTR just a bunch of quirky, silly. They're like the Young Bucks. They like it's almost like they're very arrogant and they just talk in a very funny way and they kind of think that they're funny when they're really not really. So it's almost like I just don't think that they're good mic. They're not good mic people. So I do think that you're gonna have a faction of people who are not good mic people against Adam Copeland and Christian Cage. So I don't think that. I don't think that's that helpful. And then you also have to wonder too, who's really going to challenge the Hurt Syndicate? Because like I said, I would do Joe and Hobbs or two members of the Don Callis family. Like they really need to get to that because it's almost like the Patriarchy is done. Now you have Jet Speed, the Outrunners, the Hurt Syndicate. Who's going to challenge them? And that's definitely kind of concerning because they can't beat Jet Speed because, again, they look like cruiserweights. And then also, too, the Outrunners, they kind of have some comedy in their stuff, really. So you got to have, like, a team that really wants to be serious, that looks like a legitimate threat, really. So it's going to take a while, but I really think they need to, like, either do Swerve and Osprey as a team against the Hurt Syndicate, or another faction that you can do is Don Callis family, or another faction is obviously you can do the conglomeration as well, really, or you can do the ops, really. So there's still stuff that you can do, but they really need to kind of just set up bigger and badder teams against these guys, and that really needs to be worked on. It's still a very weak tag team division. You had the women's casino Gauntlet match, and this is when I started to doze off, really, because it started to feel like a very, very long show. So you had that. There was nothing really special. They did have, I think they had some wrestler from Ring of Honor, some Japanese wrestler, and I kind of was like, who the fuck are you? I was like, who the hell are you? Who the hell are you? And then the next thing that happened was they had they had Will Osprey's wife, I believe, and then she's a wrestler as well. So, but it was ultimately a match that I think it went on 20, 30 minutes. The women wrestlers are good. They just really have to kind of follow through. How the camera was there, but they really have to be like, okay, what can we do? Queen Amina and Tekla kind of feud with each other, so can we give them a match at Forbidden Door, because Queen Amina is from Africa and Tekla is from Austria. You can do something with that. So I hope that it builds into other matches. But surprisingly, Athena won. A lot of people were saying Willow Nightingale. I was predicting Willow as well, really. But my second prediction was Athena. It was either going to be Willow or Athena. But Athena's was also a good choice. I think what they're going to do is they're going to do a triple threat at Forbidden Door. It's going to be It's going to be Toni Storm with her rematch clause. It's going to be Toni Storm with the AEW championship, women's championship. It's going to be Athena with the ROH championship, and it's also going to be Mercedes with the TBS championship, winner take all, really. I think that they just should do that. But I think that if it's Toni Storm or Athena win that, they should do something say, hey, we're going to make tournaments for these titles. I'm going to pick the women's championship, but I'm going to make tournaments for these two other titles. You can see Mercedes doing the Kurt Angle thing, where she doesn't want that, and then what happens is Tony says, hey, you know what, you have all these belts, really, but the problem is that you have to defend all these belts, really. So the same way in TNA Wrestling, Kurt Angle had the X Division tag team and heavyweight championship all at the same time, really. So I think it was Cornette or something like that, forced him to defend all that. So I think they can do that, really. But it did feel a little drawn out. I started to doze off, really, because it was just too long of a show, and now you saw this, really. And then I was just telling myself, I want the show to end, really. Then you had Toni Storm versus Mercedes Monet. Again, it was a very long show, so I think that if you cut out a few matches, then you would have something a lot better, really. So what I would say is, and then also too, one of the big problems with AEW, I would say, is that they have way too many long matches. Again, just because a match is longer does not make it good. And then also too, if you kind of have a long match over and over again, it becomes monotonous, really. So they need to learn how to have squash matches, because sometimes with WWE, that's why WrestleMania is so good, because sometimes you will have some squash matches because it just creates a contrast, So they really need to start like I said, they should make 16, 17 matches for all their shows and be like, okay, here are like 6 or 7 matches that we can use as main events for Collision and Dynamite and all that stuff, really. Um, so Tony Storm versus Mercedes, really good matches, really good counters. Um, I didn't like the beginning because you saw Tony Storm like kind of like do the cabaret poses. Like if you ever see the movie Cabaret with Liza Minnelli, like just like stretching her leg and other things like that. You also saw her spank Mercedes Monet. So it kind of turned into like in the beginning, you kind of saw what Tony Storm does a lot. She kind of is playable. She kind of takes it really silly. I'm not a fan of that in wrestling, but I will give her credit. It works for her character. Yes, and I think the second thing that it does, in my opinion, is it's all about getting in people's heads, and that's just how some wrestlers work. Like that's just how some people work. Like with John Cena and what's John Cena and Mark Henry. John Cena was kind of like doing the dancing and like other things to kind of get under Mark Henry's skin, really. So sometimes, taunting and instigating, I have to kind of accept a little bit that that's just how, like getting people's head. That's just wrestlers getting people's heads. So I can't be too critical of that. The next thing that I want to say is, it went a while. It was a really good match. Very thrilling. I was actually very surprised because actually I predicted this. I predicted Mercedes Monet, and a lot of people did, but Tony Storm actually won. It's a questionable decision because I said like Athena should have cashed in really. That's what I would have done, but Tony Storm winning was a mixed thing. Because it's like who faces Tony Storm, and then also you built Mercedes as this beast really. So it's almost like like as a lot of people were saying, Mercedes should be like a final boss, really. So it's almost like a Brock Lesnar. If you're gonna make her win all these titles and go this far, really, it's like now, what do you do with her? Because now she has 7 titles, and she has like 7 titles, and it's almost like, what do you do with her? Because eventually, you can just take all the titles off of her and make her a regular wrestler, or you can just do what I said, which is at Forbidden Door, make it a triple threat, and that would be the thing to do, really. The next match on the card was Okada versus Omega, and it's again like this was also a match that I started to black out a bit because again the show was too long, so I started to and all that stuff because I was starting to get sleepy. I'm 38 years old, so it's not because I'm old. It's because the show is too goddamn long, really. So and then also too, the entrances were good. It went a good time. There was a lot of interference by Don Callis, so I do feel a little questionable about this because it's like what a lot of people say. The problem is if you have a lot of interference by the bad guys and their managers, it becomes cliche. And I also think the other thing too is that it makes your champion look worse. It makes the villain look worse. It's almost like saying they can't take care of business, but it worked. Well, really, because obviously Don Callis, obviously with the Don Callis family, they would do stuff like this. This is just how they're set up, really. I think Kota Ibushi was out there a little bit, but I felt like, but Okada won, and I felt like, and I'm trying to look at my card. Yeah, I predicted Okada to win, and I think he was the right choice for 2 reasons. That I'm not sure how long Kenny Omega is going to be wrestling for, and it doesn't make sense if he has diverticulitis or he's recovering and he's slowing down. Really, it doesn't really make sense to have him almost like hold a title because it's almost like Adam Cole gets injured a lot. So imagine if they did something where Adam Cole won the Casino Gauntlet and became the AEW champion to kind of give him a last hurrah, and they did that with Bryan Danielson last year. So sometimes when a wrestler is winding down or they have to wind down because of health issues or surgeries or age or consistent injuries, it's just not good to put a title on them. So I think that was not a popular decision. But the good news is that it kind of made me know that that Hangman was going to win because usually that happens in a lot of professional wrestling shows. That usually the penultimate match, the heel wins. A heel wins, so that way the main event is going to include the good guy winning, really, just so there's a contrast. So it was a good match. It went a very long time. It was very thrilling. I I think I like what they said, that this is like the last time they're gonna wrestle, really. So I really like that they set it up like that. They got a standing ovation. I would say the best match I ever seen in AEW history was Osprey versus Bryan Danielson. It did not live up to that, but it did go a good while. Like definitely the first, I think like that match they had that was over an hour. That has to be the best one. I've never seen it, but I've seen clips of it. Even though that is kind of like video game wrestling, as they say, because a fight would not last that long, if that was meant to be real. But overall, this was like a really good match. It was good, and Okada did a lot of stuff, and it's always like what people say about Okada, like he really needs to kind of bring that fire to a lot of his matches, and I also like his persona. I like this privileged pretty boy. You know what? I'm better than everybody else. Like this arrogant, like rich boy. Rich boy playboy. So I really think that like I said, like he and Takeshita really need to have a feud, and it would actually be good because you don't see a lot of feuds between Japanese wrestlers, and it's gonna get a lot of attention really. So it breaks a lot of stereotypes because a lot of people will be like, oh well, these guys can't speak English, that well really. How are they gonna get over on an American company and all that stuff? Like I really think that this will open a lot of doors and be like, hey, wrestlers from Japan or Asian wrestlers can have feuds that get over and stuff like that, and it's important because we need to break stereotypes. It's just like when Rey Mysterio became popular in WWE, it broke a lot of stereotypes for Hispanic wrestlers, saying that okay, Hispanic wrestlers are not just people who speak Spanish and we can't understand them, they can be dimensional characters. Same thing with Eddie Guerrero. Really, it helped elevate Hispanic wrestlers. The same way you do Takeshita and Okada, it can help elevate a lot of like Asian and Japanese wrestlers because there's still a lot of people who stereotype, or you see Asuka screaming Japanese and other things like that. You have to kind of get past that because that's not every Asian person, and that's a stereotype really. So it can lead to a lot of progressive changes. So I hope that this leads to Takeshita and Okada, and that would be a great match. Hangman and Paige versus Jon Moxley, Texas Death Match. So it's a typical Jon Moxley match. Like as people say, Jon Moxley is just like a woman's period. Like he bleeds all the time really. It was very vicious and violent. I would say that it was kind of anticlimactic for me because definitely the most violent match I've seen in AEW had to be All Out last year with Swerve and Hangman, and the violence and how they build up and like them lasting like long in that match because they really hated and they wanted to kill each other. That was done very well. I think with this, there was a lot of shocking things, but it felt like, to me, it felt like a Combat Zone wrestling match, like a tamer version of a Combat Zone wrestling match. Like it went far, but it didn't go too far. But there were things that I liked about this match. I think the first thing that I would say is that it was violent, but it wasn't too violent. It wasn't like light tubes or weed whackers or X-Acto knives or syringes through people's cheeks or things like that. And I appreciate that because AEW does a lot of death matches and they do a lot of violent matches, but they have to understand that there is such a thing as going too far. There's such a thing as making it cartoonish, really. But every death match is a little cartoonish because people will go a long time in a match like that. But it wasn't like a Combat Zone wrestling type of match. So it went far. It delivered as a Texas death match, but it didn't like overdo it in a way. It was violent. Hangman just like shivs Moxley with a fork. You see Marie Shafir go through a table. You see them go onto broken glass. You see them go on like a bed of nails. You see like Moxley gets suplexed onto two like tables, on two chairs. Definitely hitting the edge part. And then also too, you did have interference. You had the Death Riders. Then you had Bryan Danielson interfere. You had Osprey interfere. You had Darby Allin interfere, and then you also had Swerve interfere as well, really. But I liked the ending where you had Swerve giving Hangman the chain, because I think one thing that I liked about that was almost like it's not just that Swerve believes in Hangman. He's just saying, okay, I believe you can take care of business. I'll just give you this thing to help you out, but I'm not gonna how should I say this? That sometimes he gave him the chain, but he's like, you know what, you can take care of business. You can finish this match by yourself because you're the baddest motherfucker that ever lived, really, you know. So he did enough to know that Hangman could take care of business, and he did. And then also too, the other thing about this, it was that I was a little like surprised because Will Nightingale wasn't out there. So Marina Shafir did what she wanted, and I thought there was gonna be a lot more people. But I also appreciate that they didn't do that, because the problem is that you don't want to repeat WWE. You don't want to rip off WrestleMania 40 with all that interference, and they did not do that. And I appreciate that, because they could have had Sting appear, they could have had Will Nightingale, they could have had the Ops come down, they could have had a lot more interference and craziness. And I think a lot of people thought that they were gonna like rip off either the Avengers Endgame. I've not seen that film, but I believe what happens is that all the superheroes come together, so does feel like everybody's doing their damage, really. Everybody's doing their damage to each other, or just like in the movie, just like in Bleach, like how in the anime Bleach, like it seems like whenever some character is about to lose, another person comes, and another person comes, and another person comes to do a battle, really. So it didn't feel like that. It felt like they had, a lot of restraint on how many people were interfering, really. So it didn't become like, a riot, really, or a gang fight. It was enough interference. So I appreciate like that. And I also appreciate they did not rip off on WrestleMania 40. And this is not really a violent version of WrestleMania 40 main event on Bloodline Rules. It was really just, them just, having a Texas death match with some interference. So it was good. And, Hangman won, and this was absolutely the right call, because the ratings have gone down. Moxley's not that good on the microphone. And I ultimately think that there has been a lot of investment in Hangman, and a lot of people consider him a main character, and there's been a lot of like talk about like how he's a main character, he's a dimensional character. It may push AEW into a more character-driven show. Like, you got to have great matches and great characters, not just great matches. Or just, you can't have just people who go up and down the card, really, because it confuses people. Like, I would say that one thing I like about the show is that based on some of the participants in the men's casino gauntlet match, based on Swerve and Osprey and MJF, that there is a men's heavyweight division. It's not like, Darby Allin, like last year when he was wrestling for the heavyweight title, and then he was wrestling for the tag team and then the TNT title. They're not interchanging people, which I appreciate. So overall, it was a really good show. I would say that definitely they did a great job with the fireworks. Like, they definitely overdid it with like the fireworks and the pyro and all that stuff tonight. But it was overall it was really good. I think that they put AEW in a better direction. This was a WrestleMania type of show, and with WrestleMania types of shows, it really is about where's the company going to go in the next couple of months. And putting the title on Hangman shows that AEW is going in a better direction. But also too, it's just a reminder that the things we learned from Moxley is that number one, who works and doesn't work as a champion. So the fact they put on Bryan Danielson for like a month and they got to Moxley for a while wasn't a good decision. So that it's really Hangman, Swerve, Osprey, MJF. Darby Allin could be in that group as well, really. But, and then, there's other people as well, really. But, a Hurt Syndicate versus Hangman is really, it should be the next feud of the year, really. Because, the Hurt Syndicate, they know how to talk. They know how to be the right type of heels. They know how to make AEW money, really. The Death Riders don't really, and that's the thing. You have to have characters. You have to have people who know how to talk. You have to have people who know how to make sense. Like I say, Moxley's a poor man's Bray Wyatt. So Hangman winning was the right choice. It was the right pivot. And I was also very proud because they didn't say, "Oh well, we're gonna give Darby Allin, he's gonna cash in, or Hangman's gonna lose, and we're gonna wait until Darby Allin cashes in and all that, really, or Darby Allin versus Moxley." So this was the right pivot. Like I said, the theme of the show is AEW gonna pivot, and they pivoted in the right direction. So, and ultimately, like I said, the main event usually like 51% of a pay-per-view. And they hit it out of the park, really. So I think overall, just to reiterate, they had a lot of the right results. The show was way too long. It was definitely very thrilling. And then also too, the show is so long that you can pay attention to a lot of these matches. So like I said, I think overall I would give it. I would say, in my opinion, I would give it like a B plus. I think they did the because of the Hangman thing. I think that Double or Nothing was their best show of the year because it wasn't as long. It really wasn't as long, really. This one was like way too long, and if somebody's dozing off, then you know that it's an issue. And then also too, they had a large crowd, like I think 25,000 or 26,000. They got a lot of tickets at the last minute, but this should have been 42,000. They didn't build that well to a lot of these matches, so I do think that, like I said, it was a good show, but it's clear that AEW needs to consistently pivot. And when they do, and when they listen, and when they care about pivoting and putting things in a better direction, there's a lot of optimism around the company, and that's what's going to make them make money.